Hello, everyone. Hope you can hear me out there in Mantic Land. I'm not centered. That won't do. Let me center myself. There we go. That's a bit more like it, isn't it? Ish, maybe. First up, if you're watching, can you hear me? Drop me a comment on Discord or in the YouTube chat comment type things, and let me know that this is visible and working, and that we're all here. I won't start immediately. I'll give it a couple of minutes to let people filter in. Let me just have a look. Is this working? It looks like it's working. Fantastic. Yes, Andrew, Simon, Andrew again. You can hear me. Fantastic. Brilliant stuff. As I say, I'll give it a couple of minutes and let people turn up. So yeah, this is fun. It's different. The Mantic Open Day has always soldiered on through adversity, and it's lovely to see that it's still doing that. When I was working at Mantic in 2014, 2013-ish, we had the first Mantic Open Day in the new premises where it is normally held now, where there was no lighting. There was a severe lack of things like, I think running water was an issue. There were various things. Who was here for that one? Anyone from this was there, I wonder? We had a whole thing where there was a big plan to fit lighting beforehand, but it never quite came to pass. So we ended up having pathfinders scurrying around the business, gaffer taping lights to walls, while others dashed out to supermarkets to buy every light bulb they could get their hands on. So as I say, the Mantic Open Day has been through a lot of different things, and now here we are, virtual Open Day. Even better, the parking is so much easier. Stephen, good morning. Welcome to the Needy Cat Games Game Design Seminar. Oh, we've got a whopping 8 viewers. Exciting. Hopefully we'll get some more people coming through. Either way, it doesn't matter. We're going to run this. We're going to talk about some things. Talk about like who I am, why I think I'm, worthy of chatting away to you lot. I'm going to talk about some of the things that we've worked on a little bit, but mainly I'm talking about how we at Needy Cat Games design games and the sort of things that we think about. And we've got a process. We run a game design course where we teach this stuff online, and you can get it yourself. You can have access to it. You can stream it right now if you want to. It'll be difficult to hear what I'm saying though if you do that. But yeah, I'm going to give you a discount code in the seminar to go and get that. And KB, good morning. 5 a.m. and awake. I was awake at 7 a.m. this morning, which was a slight lie-in. Our 4-year-old gave me a little bit of grace, which was nice. Fantastic. We've got a little crowd of people. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to get started. I'll give it 1 more minute, and then we will get going. And anyone else who wants to join us can do so gradually. But how is everyone this morning? As people who are in this room, tell me, is this your first Mantic Open Day? I know a few of you are familiar faces. Anyone not been to one before? Is this like the first chance you've had to come along to an open day? I've just realized my banner's still running. Hang on, let me get rid of that. There we go. I'm still figuring out all this online streamy stuff. But normally the Mantic Open Day, traditionally at this point, we'd be an hour in. There would be, people happily munching on bacon rolls and other breakfasty items, grabbing a cup of tea or something. Tea is usually in full flow at this point, and I have not got any tea. I feel like I've let myself down. Finland, US, fantastic. This is why this is cool, because this lets Mantic, and I'm not I'm sort of Mantic adjacent. I've got a lot of ties to Mantic, but I don't work there full time. But it lets like the Mantic family get further afield, because I used to work at Games Workshop. Some of you might know this, and when Games Workshop started doing like the international Warhammer Fest type events, it was a really cool thing, because you could see people that you don't normally see at events. And I think it's the same thing here with this. I'm hoping that even when the when lockdowns lift and things are back to some semblance of normal, I hope this sort of thing still happens, because I've really enjoyed these sorts of events. Mantic-esque is a great way to describe what I am. Right then, I think we should get started, because I'm just rambling away now about things. So let me see. Right, if I can do this correctly. Yes, this is the a seminar called Designing Games the Needy Cat Way. That's a picture of our needy cat, Hilo, who's very needy. And as you can see, he's sitting on a big pile of board game components. Let's talk about why we're called Needy Cat, and just who on earth this bald, bearded, bespectacled chap is, who is talking so much from the comfort of his spare room. I will apologise as well for the mess. Currently, I've squeezed the Needy Cat offices into our spare room, so everything's a little bit tatty. But yeah, who the heck am I? My name is James M. Hewitt. The M is normally silent. It just makes me more Googleable. I used to be Mantic's community manager back in the days of Dead Zone, Mars Attacks, Locker, the Kings of War, first hardback rulebook release. We used to do blogs and videos and Facebook posts. I answered emails. I did all sorts of bits and pieces. I also helped on the design for Dreadball, and ended up doing a series called Dreadball Academy with Beasts of War. It is generally not a Mantic Open day unless someone says to me, hey, are you the guy from the Dreadball Academy videos? So I've got to give that a little name check. I co-designed Hellboy and League of Infamy with my partner Sophie, who's the other half of Needy Cat Games. Before that, I was a designer at Games Workshop, so I did various games for them. I did the most recent Necromunda, Adeptus Titanicus, Blood Bowl, Blitz Bowl after I left, so many games like that. I also have designed games for other companies, and now, yeah, here we are, Needy Cat Games. Here's just a little set of tiny photos of some examples of things you might know me from. We've got Titanicus, Silver Tower, Blood Bowl, Gore Chosen, Blitz Bowl, which is like the little Games Workshop family of games. Yes, there we go. So I'm just going to answer a question in the Discord chat. Join us. I'm multitasking. I've got the Discord window open. I've got the YouTube comments open. I've got my presentation. But yeah, here are various things you might know me from. All those things there. Little game on the left there called Ancient Grudges Bonefields. That was Sophie's first design project, but I kind of helped out quite a bit, like consulted with her on it. That was for a company called Macrocosm, run by Chris Nichols, who used to be a Mantic Pathfinder. Down at the bottom, you can see the Dreadball Academy logo there. That's me and Warren from Beasts of War when we were both a bit younger. I had hair. Bottom right, you can see League of Infamy. Oh, there's that Hellboy game you might have heard of. And up the top there is a fantastic photo of me on one of my last days at Mantic, dressed as Prince Adam from He-Man. Ask me a question about that sometime if you'd like to know the full story. I think a lot of people already know it because it's a bit infamous around the Mantic brigade. So Needy Cat Games, what do? We make tabletop games for people. So, clients like Mantic or other games companies will come to us and say, we've got this range of miniatures we want to do. We've got this game we want to make. We've got this intellectual property we want to base a game around. And then we work with them to make a game. We also make games for ourselves occasionally, although it's very, very rare. Because that's just, that has to be self-financed, and who can afford that these days? We also do a rules review service. So people that have made games or are making games can come to us and we can help them test their games, write their rule books, make everything good. We run workshops and courses. We do a full 6-part course called Game Design Online, which I'll talk to you about in a little bit. We also do some courses in person. We do some work with schools and colleges as well. We organise networking and social events for the tabletop games industry. If you're anywhere near the Nottingham area, you can come and join us at one of our events once, events are happening again. We also have the Nottingham Industry Collective, which is currently running weekly get-togethers, both in the mornings and evenings online. And finally, we've got a podcast about getting into the industry called Finding Games. Look it up. We're a little bit behind on new episodes because we've been so busy, but we're looking to record some more over the lockdown. Today, in this seminar, I'm talking about how we design tabletop games. We've got quite a specific process that we use. It's tried and tested. We've been working with this process for quite a while, and we originally invented it to help us codify the game design process for our clients. So when we're talking to people about, how far along a game we are, we can use that. But we've also adapted it to make it something which we can teach as a method of designing games. So we'll talk about that. We're talking about some game design myths and trying to dispel some of those, because a lot of people, when most gamers have it in them to design a game. I believe anyone can design a game, and most people have got a good idea of a game they'd like to design, even if it's something like, I'd like to make this game, but with this. And there are certain little things, some myths that stop people from being good at that. So I'm going to talk about, some ways that you can get around those. Some of those common myths. Once you recognize it as a myth and you realize it's not true, you can just get past it and get on with the cool part of designing games. If you want to learn more, here's the plug. We have a full 6-part course called Game Design Online. You can go to needycatgames.com/learn, And if you use the discount code BearWizard, all capital letters, you'll get 20% off. That is only running until 1 p.m. though. So the code should be live now. It will remain live until 1 p.m., at which point it stops. It's like a little flash sale. So if you want to, come and learn the course, that's what you want to do. What we're talking about today kind of lifts a few things from various parts of the course. But the full 6-parter comes with recordings of all the seminars, which literally you can stream immediately. It comes with full reading lists, course material, support things, and also access to the Needy Cat Games Discord server, where we've got a channel just for that course, which is like locked for anyone who isn't part of the course. And you can discuss game design. You can talk to us, ask us specific questions about your designs. You can get pointers on getting into the industry. Also, you can discuss things with other people who've been on the course, which is handy because you've got a similar framework. So yeah, if you want to do that, come along, use the discount code BearWizard, which is an in-joke for people that were there, and learn about games. Hello, David. I love it. There's loads of little familiar faces turning up. This is why I always love the Mantic Open Day. Everyone, comes along, and it's just a lovely flashback to my Mantic days. But without any further ado, should we get going? Let's talk about game design. Ooh. So, first up, we're talking about designing tabletop games. What is a tabletop game? Because there's a lot of different definitions. I like to lay out what I mean by it up front. So, it is a broad term. We talk about tabletop games. We mean board games, card games, role-playing games, miniatures games, roll and write games, dice games, war games, all that sort of stuff. Anything that you can play on or around a table, probably using physical components, but also at the moment, online play is a big thing. So it's not always like that. It's games that are designed to be kind of enjoyed among a group of people, face-to-face, although even that isn't particularly a particularly good way of describing them. But generally, what we're talking about is tabletop games as opposed to video games, app games, sports games, that sort of thing. Hopefully that gives you enough of a context to, get where we are and what we're talking about today. David, you've waved, not enough sleep. I'll wave back to you, and then we can pretend it was intentional. Big disclaimer, there is no one magical path to create tabletop games. What I can tell you today is our process. It's a tried and tested thing. We've used it a lot. We've got people who have been on our course. We've been running this course for over a year now, and in various different forms. And there are people who are now taking games, preparing to get them on Kickstarter, having used this process. So it does work. It's not a magic bullet. Obviously, you have to put a lot of hard work in yourself. But this is our process. It's a good starting point. And we really recommend people go on and, use the reading lists we provide with the course, read around the subject, join some online communities, and find their own way of doing it. But this hopefully should give you a good head start. During this, if you've got any questions, pop them in the chat on YouTube or on Discord. I'm looking at both. I can answer questions either immediately as they come up if they're little quick things, or I'll do a proper little questions session at the end of each section. And at the very end of the talk, we'll do a general Q&A where you can ask me questions about anything you like, really. I don't know how good my answers would be on things like theoretical physics or, the science of baking. If you keep it vaguely within my wheelhouse, I'll do what I can. But if you want to ask me about, projects I've worked on, my time at Mantic, by all means, go for it. So here it is, the meat of the seminar, the Needy Cat Games design process. As I say, we designed this initially to help out when we were working with clients like Mantic. So when we go in for a meeting or we want to, have a catch up about our progress, one of the things about tabletop game design is it's quite a new discipline. It's not a thing that's got a lot of, there's an increasing amount of writing, but there aren't really any conventions about how it should be done yet. So it's not like there are named stages of a game design. So when we go in for a client meeting, it can be quite difficult to say, oh, we're at this stage. So we invented a system to make this easier. And we actually have this on our website, and I'll show you what it roughly looks like. This is a simplified version. We have a few more steps. We kind of break these steps down a little bit more on our website. But this generally is the way we design our tabletop games. You can go to needycatgames.com/design-process if you want to see the entire thing all written out. But the reason that is there is we wanted to have something we could point at during meetings and say, we are at this stage. So let's talk about what this means. We start off with a kickoff. Now, this is true of how we do things. So a kickoff for us means we meet with a client and we decide like the scope of the game. Is this a big sprawling game? Is it a small thing? What size do we want the box to be on the shelf? We're not looking at specifics. We're just getting a rough idea. Is this a Kings of War, or is it a Dead Zone, or is it is it something much smaller than that? Even when you're not looking at a game design from a commercial point of view, when you're just designing games for yourself, this stage is really useful. The key point of our process is, even though we designed it for client work, it works really well as a way to guide your own designs. So the kickoff is about laying out the framework of your game. Think about the mechanics, think about the theme, think about what you want the player to be thinking about, all the kind of big questions. And we always start with a brief. You don't have to, but it can be a helpful tool. A brief being something where you just write down what you want the game to be in really broad terms. From there, we go into a part of the process called research and development, where we go out and we just try to fill our brains with as much ammo as possible for the design process. So let's say we were doing a game about, I don't know, let's say we wanted to do a game based in the Kings of War universe about collecting bones to make an undead army or whatever. Yeah. So we would go out and we would start doing loads of reading on the Mantic undead lore. We would do as much reading as we can about that. We might look into things like archaeology, about different ways people find bones. We cast our net wide, and we don't just look at other games. We look at any sort of media. So in the past, we've looked at things like YouTube videos and documentaries and things. We'll play other games like video games, board games, card games around a similar subject or using similar mechanics to what we want to use. We really just go as broad as we can and start researching as much stuff as we can. From there, we start tying things together into a series of idea boards. I'm going into more detail on what those are during the actual course itself, but in general, what we're talking about is getting all of our game ideas out onto paper so that we can see generalized groups of ideas together. So, for example, here's all the ideas we've got for how resources might work, or how movement might work, or how attacking might work, whatever it might be. From there, we create what's called a test build. And that is the first time the game hits the table. So we take the ideas from our idea boards and we start pulling them together into something that could feel like a game. We don't worry about any details at this point, and we do not write any rules down. We might make a few little scribbled notes, but what we're doing is we're looking at trying to create the core gameplay loop, as we call it, as in during a player's turn, halfway through the game, what are they doing? And we try to model that. So we'll grab some spare components, we'll grab some scraps of paper, and we'll just start trying things out. And the idea is you try a thing out. If it works, cool. If not, you change it. Even if it works, you might change it and see how it works differently. It's kind of like the free-form jazz of game design, where you are, just improvising the entire way. And then you start testing. And playtesting is such an important part of the game design process. You try things out, you take them to the table, you give it a go. If it doesn't work, you change it. If it does work, you build on it. And eventually, you will have what we call a vertical slice of the game. That's a term that we've borrowed from video game design. It shows a bit of everything of the game. It doesn't necessarily go into great detail on everything. There might be whole sections that aren't represented. Generally, you're not worrying about the start or the end of the game, just the middle. But the test build, is all about getting to that vertical slice where you can kind of show off what the gameplay is. Once that is done and you can kind of play through that with someone else, you probably don't start playing with someone else until you're confident that it works. We then go to the mechanical draft, which is the first time we start writing rules down. So here we try to create a game that has a start, a middle, and an end. And we codify that by writing the rules down. The rules don't have to be pretty. We're not including color text. We're not including diagrams necessarily. It's just bullet points, nice and straightforward. And it also will be quite narrow in scope. So if for example, we were designing, let's say League of Infamy is a great example. League of Infamy, the mechanical draft had 2 playable characters and 1 scenario. And if you had 4 players, 2 of them, so you duplicate the 2 playable characters. So you had 2 of character A and 2 of character B. And I think at the time we didn't have a solid idea of which character they'd be. So they were just 2 generic, here's a fighty character, here's a shooty character. But the idea is you're looking at the gameplay. You're not worrying about the frilly fancy bits. You're just getting the core gameplay down. Start, middle, end. What are players doing on their turn? What decisions are they making? How does the game work? We then start testing that. And we test and we test and we test and we refine and we refine and we refine. And eventually we get to the point where the game is really solid and it's a really fun, interesting game. Then we start folding in more stuff, and that's how we transition into the full draft. The full draft ends up as everything that will be in the game box. So all of the rules, all of the cards, all the tokens, a full prototype basically. And the rulebook will be written to teach the game as well as just to note the rules down. So really it's a whole different stage of rules writing. Finally, we get into after we've tested the full draft, because we then test the full draft, we start doing blind testing, which I'll talk about later. After that's done, we get into handover and amend. So for us, if we're working with a client, we hand it over to them. They might edit it, get it put through, layout and graphic design and art and all that sort of stuff. And then we make any amends that come up as a result of that. If it's a project for ourselves, or if you're using this to create your own games, that might be the point where you start looking at working with freelance artists or illustrators or graphic designers, editors. And that's at that point, the game design is finished and everything else happens that turns it into a finished game. So that in a nutshell is like our process. Just to give you some ideas of some points in more detail. Here's a look at a test build. So this is a photo from one of our game design courses, which we ran in person last summer and last autumn. So this was one where we gave people a big bunch of components and just invited them to make a game in an afternoon. And so as you can see, there was a whole load of like scrappy ideas on the table, scribbled things, tokens made out of bits of card or whatever else was on hand. We just had a big box of components people could use. And it really is a rough prototype. Again, you're not worrying about writing rules down or getting things right or being too precise. One of the biggest mistakes we see people make is trying to be too detailed at the start of the process. So this is quick set sketches, rough notes, no rulebook. It's a 10-minute slice of gameplay. That's what we told people to aim towards for this afternoon, was make a game that you can play for 10 minutes, even if that's just a slice of a bigger game. It's function over form, by which I mean you're not illustrating things, you're not worrying about making it pretty. What you're looking for is your core concept solid? Is it interesting? Is there fun to be found? That's different from is it fun? What that means is, yeah, it's rough and scrappy, but if you were to get that all cleaned up, would it be a fun game? And finally, you're looking for, is it an awful idea? I've had several game ideas which get to the test build stage and I go, oh, this doesn't work at all. Either because it's just not very compelling, or it's one of the really common ones is it's an interesting mechanic, but it's not an interesting game. So the player isn't really doing much. They're just sitting there while the game plays itself. So the test build is that's what we're looking at that stage. Next up, mechanical draft. This is a functional prototype. So this is a prototype for Robot Fight Club, which is a game we took to Kickstarter earlier this year. Unfortunately, then a global pandemic happened and it all kind of fell apart. But it'll be returning to Kickstarter at some point. This is enough to play a basic full game, and you've got a rulebook which codifies the game, doesn't bother teaching it. You're not worrying about that. We have a little bit of graphic design consideration, so we start thinking about how the cards are laid out, how components are laid out, how big things have to be. So we're focusing on the user interface side of graphic design. And here what you're looking at is, does the core engine work? So does the game function? Are the players invested and interested? When we're testing, we're not just looking at how the game works, we're looking at how the players respond to it. League of Infamy is a great example of this. League of Infamy, you can read the rules and it can seem quite dry, but it is one of the most engaging and fun games I think we've designed, because the players are generally constantly laughing throughout a game because they are all trying to screw each other over the entire time. And that's why it's so important to look at the way the players are reacting. Are they engaged? Are they interested? When it's not their turn, are they looking at the board state or are they checking their phone? One of the really key things is, are there interesting decisions to be made? A game designer, it might have been Jeff Engelstein, but I'm not sure, said that the key to good gameplay is decision making. It might have been Sid Meier, I'm not sure. But yeah, decisions are really the core thing when it comes to game design. If you don't let your players make interesting decisions, the game will feel flat and boring and dull. Also, of course, at this point, we're looking, look at this throughout the process, but really here, are there any glaringly huge broken bits? And the first time a mechanical draft hits the table, there will be so many of those. Again, playtesting is such a key part of the design process. Game design is a process of refinement and iteration, and it's all about finding the mistakes and fixing them. No game is perfect on its first draft, believe me. And then here's a final draft. This is the final draft for Robot Fight Club, where all the art is more or less intact. Everything looks as close to the finished product as possible. At this point, you're really not ignoring anything. You are making it as complete as you possibly can. So you've got diagrams, you've got illustrations. Everything that you need to call the game complete is there. Now, to be clear, you don't have to have the actual illustrations in place as long as you've got like a placeholder for them. It might be that you are going to get the art done, but you can drop in like a colored box or something you've grabbed from Google Images. The point is it's as close to complete as you can do. If you don't have the skills to put art and that in there, don't worry about it. Put a placeholder in and get someone to actually, do that who's a professional. At this point, what you're looking for is the game easy to learn. Hi, Neil. Is it clear? Is the interface polished? What have you missed? So you're giving the game to your playtesters and then you're stepping back. You're not teaching them how it works. You're letting the game teach itself and you're gauging their reaction. And really, at this point, you shouldn't be making any big changes. This should all be polish, hopefully. If you make a big change, you kind of have to step back to your mechanical draft style of testing and then push forward. Question there from Ronnie Renton. Not sure who this is. Is Mantic the absolute best company you've ever worked for? And is Ronnie the nicest, most professional and organised person you've ever freelanced for? It all depends how much I'm getting paid to answer that. Now, actually, I will say Mantic are an absolute lovely bunch, and I wouldn't be doing these open days with as much glee as I do if I didn't enjoy working for Mantic. They are fantastic. I love them. And he's not even paying me for that. I just said that off my own back. But Ronnie, we can talk later for the money, yeah. Anyway, so just to go back to the seminar there, here's a little reference chart for kind of what you look at each stage. So as you can see, the top row, their test build, you're worrying about very little. You're just trying to get in the core rules and you're barely writing those down. Mechanical draft, you're not worrying about, color text. By color text, we mean like any kind of narrative or thematic text in the game. You're just putting the rules text in. You're not worrying about a tutorial or anything that teaches the game. You're only using diagrams and examples where absolutely necessary. And then for the full draft, you're including the whole lot. Let's look at some real world examples. Here is an example of my test build notes. This was from when I took the game in to show Mantic in a meeting. When I was kind of pitching the test build to them. We tend to go and have meetings at the end of the research and development process so we can show off our idea boards, and also during the end of the test build phase when we're happy with the test build of the game. So we'll go and show them, here's like 10 minutes of gameplay. And these were my notes from that. As you can see, very scrappy, handwritten. This is mainly, the point of this is for my reference as a designer. So I write these notes down and I use them to teach the game to the player. The player at no point has to read these rules, so they can be as scrappy as you like. And when you're first working on your test build, you're not even getting this far. Here's the Hellboy mechanical draft. This is something we used on the first big Hellboy playtest day, I believe, where we've got here, some of you might even have been there. You might remember this. It's kind of very loose, bullet pointy rules. The idea is the mechanical draft isn't teaching the game, so that we will show people how the game works, but with this document, they can look up rules mid-game. And then finally, the full draft, as you can see here, is much more text heavy. It's much more detailed. It explains things. It teaches the game as well. And this is the manuscript that we then sent that then Mantic laid out. So you should be able to compare this to the text in the Hellboy rulebook, and it'll be 90% the same. It was then edited to fix all my mistakes and tidy things up, so it's not exactly the same. But as you can see, we've even got things like we've got like formatting, we've got a little diagram in place down there. But all of that stuff was at the end of like a 9-month process. So you don't get to this point writing out a full rulebook until you've done a hell of a lot more other work. And that really is the key point of this process. The Needy Cat process is designed. It's kind of I've discovered it is loosely the same sort of framework as like agile project management, which is a thing that I've never used, but I've had people tell me that that's sort of what we're talking about, which is about creating a thing like the minimum viable product, I believe the word is. You create something, you only put as much work in as you need to get something to work for what you need it for right now, and then you push on to the next stage. What this does is it lets you focus on what is important at every stage. So you're not worrying about having to be really detailed with your rules writing until you've got a decent game that works. And it's one of the main ways where people, fall down when they're designing games and they're new at it. It makes sure you don't get ahead of yourself. One thing that, again, I see new designers fall down on is they might get their rule book laid out and pay someone to do art for it before they've actually really tested the game much. And all that means is that you're going to have to redo that layout when you realize your rules are broken and you have to change it, because no written rule book or no designed game will ever stay the same past its first draft, because every time you test it, you will change something. Those changes get smaller as you go on, but every test will lead to change. Mark, correct? Yes, sprints. That's a term from Agile, isn't it? 1 second, I'm just answering a question in Discord. Someone asked, "Will there be an online course?" There will indeed. It's available now at needycatgames.com/learn. Use promo code Wizard for 20% off. There we go. Fantastic. So yeah, the point of this process, though, is it's all about making it easier to design games. So yeah, any questions before I go on about our design process? Anything you'd like to know in a bit more detail, or anything you're not sure about, anything that doesn't make sense, anything you disagree with and hate me for? Look at that. See, I can put comments on the screen. Didn't mean to, but now I know that. It is quite similar to software development where Agile is mostly used. Yes, absolutely. So one thing that we've learned throughout our time as Needy Cat is that we've, as we've been talking to other game designers in other fields, so video game designers specifically, we've kind of borrowed ideas from them, which is all fed into this. Another question here. At which point do you bring outsider playtesters along? I will talk about that very shortly. We're going to talk a little bit about playtesting later on in this. And here's one we always get asked: do you start with mechanics or fluff? For a start, the term fluff hurts me. It doesn't really. People get very precious about it. It is a loving term. It is said with a lot of affection for the color text and the narrative. But some designers take umbrage because it sounds like it's just packing fluff. I think that's the way that the term was originally used, meaning something which doesn't really matter. But from our point of view, it depends. Some games start with a cool mechanical idea. Some of them start with an interesting theme, and then you fold out from that point. I tend to always have a theme in mind as early as possible, because I like to design games thematically so that all the mechanics fit the theme. So with Hellboy, we wanted to make sure that the game felt like a Hellboy comic. But what I will say is when we're working for a client, that often they generally have the theme already set, which makes our job a bit easier because we then have a starting point. So Hellboy, we had the theme. There it was. Have you ever started a theme and changed midway through? Yes, Absolutely. We've definitely reskinned a couple of games. In fact, Hellboy itself, the core engine for Hellboy, started out as a game we were commissioned to design by a different company who then decided they didn't want us to do it anymore. They called it off. And despite our best efforts, they'd never signed any paperwork. And so we thought, oh, fine, we'll just use that thing we'd put 3 months' work into as a starting point for an engine for Hellboy. And it changed massively, but it was a good starting point. Neil has jumped too far forward. Time to dial back and get to basic testing. That is the number one thing we hear from people who have been on this course is, oh, I've gone way too far ahead. I need to go back and do the earlier stages. And that's why we do this course, because that is absolutely the right answer. You need to start with the basics and move on. And it's something that is really unintuitive, because when you start designing a game, you start thinking about the games that you play, and the way you see those is you see them rules first. And so you start thinking that's the best place to write. And I absolutely did the same mistake. Ronnie will happily tell you, I'm sure, when I first came in and pitched a game called Razordisc, which was like a precursor to Dreadball-ish, sort of, I came in with a rulebook full of color text and layout, and it was not necessary at all. How do you tackle AI in a game for solo play? Do you see more requests for solo? Okay, good question. I'm going to come back to that one at the very end, if that's all right. Ask me again at the Q&A at the end. Where do I get ideas for games? All sorts of places. I keep a little notepad, and whenever I have an idea, I write it down. And at the moment, generally, most of the stuff that we work on comes from clients, so we don't have much time to work on games for ourselves. But I've got a huge list of games I want to work on. At which point do little card text and extra rules come into play, mechanical draft, full draft? It depends what it is. So if it's something that is, integral to the gameplay experience, it comes in at mechanical draft. We might start adding more of those in during mechanical draft, because mechanical draft is not one thing. That might take 2 to 3 months with 7 or 8 iterations of the game, adding more and more detail each time. So it starts at mechanical, then carries on through full. Could I elaborate on the use of vertical slice a bit more through examples? Yes, but I'm going to do that in the Q&A at the end, if that's all right with you. Ask me again in the Q&A, because I want to get this one finished. I don't want to go into big examples right now. Yes, Ronnie raised this. That was true. Absolutely. And actually, on the Needy Cat Games Patreon, plug, I have a video where I go through the Razordisc rules and pull them apart, and I'm horribly critical towards my past self. Cool. So yeah, here we go. That is I think the best time to move on. If you have any more questions, as I say, I'll do a Q&A at the end, and bigger questions you can ask me then. So playtesting. Playtesting is one heck of a thing. It's really important. What is playtesting? Playtesting is the act of playing some or all of a game with the intention of improving the design. So that is a very specifically worded sentence there. 2 key points. It's playing some or all of a game. You haven't got to play a complete game to be playtesting. So when you're in your early stages of development, don't get hung up on trying to make a full game before you test it. You can just test one element or one mechanic or one central idea. Secondly, you're doing it with the intention of improving the design. It's not just playing a game. You have to go in with a solid idea of what you're looking for. You have to take notes, gather feedback throughout, and do it with the intention of making changes at the end. The changes you make might be bigger or smaller depending on where you are in the game design process. But basically, as it says there, playtesting is the best, possibly only, I would actually say only, way to find out if a game works. A game that is just written down, that is, theory only, you'll have no idea whether it's any good until it hits the table. If you're not gathering feedback, you're just playing. We've met a lot of designers who have said things like, oh, we've been playtesting this game for a year. And then you play it and it's still full of little mistakes and things. You think, oh, that's interesting. How's that happened? And a lot of the time it's because what they've actually been doing is running demo games. So they've been running their friends through games. They've been taking it to shows and whatever else, not taking notes, not really taking on feedback. What they're looking for is to see if people like their game. They're not making an effort to improve their game through testing. At that point, you're not really testing, you're just playing. Playtesting is iterative. what I mean by that is it's a repetitive process that you will eventually go mad through doing. It can keep on going forever and ever and ever, but it goes in cycles. So you design part of the game, you test it, you see what works, what doesn't, what's fun, what's not. You make changes, you start sanding down, collapsing mechanics together, refining, and you keep on doing that until it stabilizes, by which I mean you play it and you don't think that could be better. You think that's as good as it can be. We're happy with that. Then you repeat. You go with another part of the game and you just keep on going over and over again, smoothing out all the rough edges until your game starts playing smoothly, is fun, and you feel confident in showing it off to people. A big part of game design is having like a mixture of confidence and humility. You have to be confident enough to show your ideas off to people, knowing that they're probably broken. The ideas, not the people. The people might be broken as well, but that's neither here nor there. And humility to accept the fact that you're going to need to make those changes, even if you disagree with them initially. Any creative project that you put in front of other people, it's like you're bearing part of your soul, and game design is no different. And sometimes you can have a really cool idea and you show it to someone and they go, no, it doesn't do anything for me, doesn't work, I don't like it. And that can be really heartbreaking, but you have to accept that and take it on as feedback. So yeah, playtesting is iterative and it can go on forever. Thankfully, for me, when I'm doing designs for clients, I have deadlines. And I really enjoy watching them sail past. I do my very best to, hit deadlines. But the key point is that having a deadline gives you an obvious end to your project. Without that, you can just test forever. The problem is, though, that you get the law of diminishing returns coming into effect, by which I mean you might, in your early playtests, if you imagine game design being on a percentage scale, which it isn't, but 100% is a perfect game, and you might start at maybe 30%, your cool idea, which needs a lot of refinement. Your first test might take it to 40. Next one takes it to 45 because you do a really a good one, but there's not as much changing. It will gradually diminish, and you get to the point where every test you do is maybe adding 0.5% because you're just refining and refining and refining. And you reach a point where really you're not doing anything other than just playing the game again and again and again. So you have to get to the point where you finish a project. And that in itself is its own reward. There's a fantastic quote by Warren Ellis that I've put here, who's a comic book writer. I believe he was a journalist as well for quite a while. He was talking about writing, creative writing, but it absolutely applies to game design. It's all layers, always rewriting over and over through previous sentences and words, just building it up coat by coat until it holds some weight. You have permission to be complete. I shan't use the word he used. Let's call it rubbish in all but the last layer. And you get to decide which layer is the last. What he means there is you have open license to make mistakes and design bad games. All you have to then do is recognize that, test them, and fix them. We actually have 3 types of testing that we talk about. We've got solo testing, which is you sitting there by yourself with your game on the table in front of you, trying things out, making changes in real time. It's very freeing. It's very liberating. It's actually really good fun. It's one of the parts that I really enjoy. And I wish I could do more of it myself. Just the act of trying something out, changing things. It's you feel like the creative energy, flowing through you. From there, you move on to guided testing, which is where you are running the game for a group of testers. And it could be 1 or 2. It could be a large group. It could be a whole room full of tables. We've certainly run playtest days where we've got, 20, 30 people in a room playing, on 8 to 10 tables. But the point is that the designer is there, and the designer is making themselves available to help with rules queries and probably even teach the game. So the rules at this point, the game engine is being tested. The rules writing is not being tested so much. Blind testing is where you are testing the full game experience, including the way the rules are written. So the designer gives a copy of the game and stands away. Ideally, completely removes themselves. I know some testers who will leave the room and set up a video camera. Obviously, they'll let their testers know this. Don't film people without their consent. If nothing else, you might learn some things that they think about you that you'd rather not. But yeah, the point is that you're not there. You're not helping them. You're letting the game do all the lifting. It's quite difficult. When you're in the room, people will turn to you and ask you a question. You kind of have to go, sorry, check the rule book. And I struggle with that myself. But you have to get good at it. But yeah, vitally here, you are testing the way the game product works. Conveniently, these three tie in quite nicely. It's like we planned this. Those three tie in quite nicely to the three stages of game design. So while you're doing your test build, solo testing is great. You might, towards the end of the test build, bring in another person to bounce ideas off. But generally, you are experimenting. You're doing big changes all the time. So solo testing is the way forward. After that, once you've got your full game out and you want to just test that engine, guided testing is great because you're not worrying about how the rules are written. You're just getting a group of people who aren't you to play the game, getting their opinions, seeing how they approach the game, and you can start tweaking and testing. And finally, blind testing is most useful at the full draft stage. Blind testing is the most straightforward, honest, granular feedback you'll get about your game, but you can't do it until your game is pretty much finished. So yeah, that ties in nicely with the full draft. This isn't absolute. In part 3 of our online course, we talk about the different ways of doing this and how they tie in differently at different stages. And you might have crossover. So, for example, with mechanical draft, you tend to start with solo, then go into guided. But as a general rule of thumb, this works quite well. Any questions about playtesting? Let me just look through the comments first. Kieran makes a great, kill your darlings is absolutely a thing we talk about. We talk about murdering your darlings, looking for ideas that you've put in because you love them. And it's very easy to keep them in beyond the point at which they should be there. You have to recognize that and get rid of those ideas. Serial Cat wishes to join a playtest group. Look up, if you're in the UK, Google Playtest UK. If not, look at things like meetup.com. There are various places where you can sign up, find local playtest groups. There are, all sorts of things that you can do in that regard. You can playtest games online at the moment. As Mark says, you can come to the Needy Cat website and sign up as a playtester. We aren't running anything currently through an open group, but we do occasionally do shout outs and we ask for testers for our games. Look online. There are loads of resources. If you can't find anything else, come and ask me in the in the Mantic Discord server, and I can point you towards some links. Mantic Open Day, you'll often find playtests or demos of new games. If you're in the UK, absolutely look up Playtest UK. That's your one. Where do you find your playtesters? Good question. I run things like this, and then Mark puts a link to our playtester link, and people come and sign up with us. No, honestly, there are several different ways. We go into this in a bit more detail in our course, but generally, your gaming group is a good source, but don't overuse them because they'll get sick of you. You can find local game design groups. One of the best things you can be a part of is a game design collective where you'll have, a load of people who all get together and test each other's games out. Look for events like Protospiel. There was one of those in the UK back in November. It's a big playtesting event. But also just generally finding, open up events, running events like a playtest event in a local pub function room or something, and just posting adverts in your local gaming store. All of these are options. I mean, running playtest events in your gaming store is a great thing because you can find a nice group of people who are already gamers, and you can forge that link with your gaming store so that if your game eventually comes out, you've already got a foot in the door there. Question there from Pitters on Discord. Are we running any in-person courses? Haven't got anything planned right now for some reason. But yeah, we'd absolutely love to. We did our game design course last year as a 3-part thing, so 3 full days. We might do that again. We're wanting to sort of figure out the best way to go about it, really. At the moment, though, for obvious reasons, it is all online. Right. We're coming towards the end of the course now. Let's talk about some game design myths. These are things which are common traps that you need to avoid if you're designing games. They stop people from making games. They're mental barriers. that will hold you back. And I guarantee if you've ever tried designing a game, I would say there's an 80% chance, possibly a 90% chance that you have fallen for at least one of these. I'll be honest with you, I probably would say it's even higher. I think pretty much every new designer has fallen afoul of one of these things. If you can recognize these, like most things in life, once you recognize the problem, it is much easier to circumvent it. So learn these things, take them to heart, write them down, put them on the front of your game design notebook, stick them to the wall in front of your desk. Myth number 1 is that ideas are inherently valuable. And this sounds mean to say it, but the truth is that ideas are never in short supply. We get emails, multiple emails a month from people saying, I've got a great idea for a game. If you design it, we can share the profits. Funnily enough, we don't tend to say yes, because an idea is nothing. You need to take that idea to the forge and work at it through testing, iteration, and refinement until it's good. This is why we talk about getting your test build made as soon as possible. So you don't start writing your rules down and codifying your ideas and worrying about how they're presented until you've taken them to the table and seen if they're actually worth it. It's really tempting to get your idea. This is going back to that thing about murdering your darlings. It's really tempting to get an idea that isn't quite working. Just keep on working at it, even though really you should give up because you're convinced it's a good idea. It's one of those things where people often think, I'm gonna revolutionize games. I'm gonna do this thing that no one's done before, and they will, waste so much time trying to make it work, and then eventually realize it doesn't. You need to realize when an idea isn't any good. And this applies at all levels. So this is ideas for games, ideas for mechanics, ideas for changes and tweaks once you've started testing. Remember that ideas by themselves mean nothing. The thing that really matters is outcomes. Number 1 is that designing games and writing rules are the same thing. Now, obviously, we've talked about this a little bit already, but being a game designer and a rules writer are really two different skill sets. And it's very possible to be great at one and terrible at the other. I freely admit that I'm a better game designer than a rules writer. My rules tend to be quite waffly and long. I upset editors by writing things that are far too long. I upset graphic designers and layout artists more than anything else because I put far too much text on cards. But you need to recognize that these are two different things, and you will need to develop them separately. And in the same way that you learn to talk before you learn to write, you have to learn how to design games before you learn how to write them. There's a mistake in these slides. It says more on that later. What it should say is more on that earlier because we've already talked about it. Sorry, I reorganized these slides. I honestly don't know if I even know what I'm talking about anymore. But yeah, what I'm trying to get at is that designing games and writing rules aren't the same thing. Don't start your game design by writing the rules for it. Myth number 3. People want to steal your game. This is something we see all the time, especially in like online game design communities. People will say, I've got this great idea for a game. I've been testing it. I've been playing it. I need to get some advice on it, but I'm not going to put it up because I'm scared that someone's going to steal it. The fact is that you should be sharing your game with other designers, other players, people generally. Chances are any designer worth their salt has got a million ideas already. See the previous thing about ideas being inherently worthless. And even if they want to borrow your ideas, and even if they want to steal your game wholesale, they're going to develop it in a whole different direction. I guarantee it. A thing that we keep wanting to do is we want to do a game jam, like a full day. Everyone come along. We'll sit in a pub for one day when that's a thing, and we're going to design some games. And what I want to do is I want to give everyone a copy of a game, something like Ludo or Snakes and Ladders, something simple that is universal, and say, go and develop this, make it a good game. And I guarantee that you would, if you had 10 different people in that room, you would end up with 10 wildly different games. Some people would say, oh, I don't like the fact that it takes too long, so they'd make it much shorter. Some people would say, I don't like the fact that there's not much strategy, so they'd add way more decisions. All of these things would happen in different directions. Any game with a bit of development will go off on a wildly different path. So even if someone does steal your idea, they're probably going to develop it differently. Most importantly, the reward massively outweighs the risk. You will get so much input, criticism, feedback from putting your game up in front of other people that it will hugely outweigh any risk of them stealing your ideas. At the end of the day, the games that tend to get stolen are big, successful games. Pandemic gets pirated quite a lot. By the time your game is that successful, you've got bigger things to worry about. You're thinking about your next project. So don't let those 3 myths stop you. Right, with 5 minutes to go before the hour is up, I said I'd do about an hour, we've actually reached the end of the seminar. So if you have any other questions, let's talk about them. Initially, obviously, any questions about those myths or questions about things you've worked on? There were a couple of things that I said, ask me again at the end. What were they? It's amusing when myth 1 and 3 are combined. Correct, absolutely. People who want to steal your people, ideas are worthless. The idea people would want to steal your ideas, it doesn't really add up. Any additional questions? Hacks5 on Discord to sign up for the next course. Congratulations, you will get an email with all the details and all the stuff that you can look at once I finish this seminar. We had a question earlier. Let's have a look. What else has been said in the comments? You did a version of Space Hulk for your GCSE maths coursework. Amazing. Any chance to get games into things, I fully approve of. Everyone's an ideas guy. Yes, absolutely. Oh, yeah, so you had a question about handling AI. How do you tackle AI in a game for solo play? My goodness, good question. The first thing to do is recognize that not every game will work with solo play. The problem with creating a solo, like an AI system, is that you have to have a game which has a very limited decision tree, effectively. So what you have to think about is when a player is playing the game, what things are they doing? So, for example, let's look at the enemies in Hellboy. In Hellboy, the enemies are controlled by an AI system. So you're saying, well, if there was a player controlling those enemies, what would they be thinking of trying to do? And the answer is they would be looking for which agents are the most vulnerable, maybe, and they would, move their enemies and make them attack. So you have to think about how you can handle that. How can you streamline that down into a process that an AI system can handle? In a game like Dreadball, the number of decisions you make on your turn is so vast that writing an AI system for it would be really difficult. It would be very long-winded. And the amount of time of steps you'd have to go through to make it work would, massively increase the playtime. So that means that game isn't necessarily appropriate for an AI system. Now, once you figure that out, you then want to think about how you can create systems that let the game play itself, let elements, act by themselves. And again, you want to keep them pretty simple, because you don't want the AI system to take away from the fun of the game. Generally, with any sort of game design project, you want the rules to fade into the background. You want people to be enjoying the game experience, not noticing the rules wherever possible. And of course, AI systems have a habit of making that not the case. They tend to bring it in so that the rules become quite a focus. And then it's just a case of trying to keep it simple while also making the game work by itself in a way that is predictable enough that it's easy, but surprising to the player, so that it's not just by rote. So you can't always predict exactly what the enemy will do. So you want to include some kind of dice roll or some kind of random element, for example. And then it's a case of just testing it. Like anything else, you get an initial system out and you just test, see what works, see what doesn't, and refine it from there. But I'm sure, there's whole reams that can be said about making AI systems for games. I would recommend looking into the automata systems by Stonemaier Games. So games like Scythe, Wingspan, there's a whole bunch of other games. Jamie Stegmaier is a game designer who put a lot of thought into AI systems in games, and they have these whole automata systems which add into the game and play the game as a new player, and they are so well done but so complex. So it's worth looking into those. Question from Paul on Discord. There's a lot of fan additions appearing online. How do I feel about that? And am I seeing things and thinking, I wish I'd done that? Yeah, I mean, I always love seeing fan add-ons to games. I started off, that was how I started designing games. I started off by making my own homebrew rules, my own house rules for games. So I love it when I get to see people having the same kind of fun with games I've worked on. There are a few things, of course, you look at them in hindsight and go, oh, yeah, that should have been the case. As I said during the talk, a game design generally finishes, in my case, when the deadline hits. So there is always more stuff I could have done. And you kind of have to accept that and accept that, hindsight is 2020. So yeah, there are definitely things that I think it would be nice if we'd done that. Some of the things were limitations that we had due to the licensing agreement for Hellboy specifically, or things that were constraints of time or graphic design and whatever else. So, for example, some people have done amazing fully illustrated case files, and there are several reasons why we couldn't have done those ourselves, but I love the fact that that stuff is out there and people can download it and pimp their game, so to speak. We've got a question here. What have we got? How do you make a game different from another game? This is a very good question. How do we make Dread Ball different from Blood Bowl? Well, a big part of it comes down to thinking about what the aims of the game are. So if you're making a game that is similar to something else but different, you think, well, what do I want to make differently? What do I want to do differently? What changes would I like to make? So, for example, when we made Dread Ball, we knew that Blood Bowl was a big thing, and so one of the considerations was, how do we make this different? What are the things that we don't like about Blood Bowl that could be done differently? So, the length of play, the number of players in the pitch was quite unwieldy. The size of the pitch. So we were thinking, how can you go from there and do that? Obviously, Jake can probably give better advice if you can speak to him. But it's true of any game design. When I make a dungeon crawling game, there are so many dungeon crawling games out there. So I think, what am I trying to say here that hasn't been said before? And actually, one of the biggest tips I can give is play as many games as you can. The more games you play, not just ones that are like the thing you're trying to do, but things that are very different. The more you do that, the more ideas you'll have, the more brain ammo you will get that you can then fire out in the form of new innovative games. Yes, vertical slice. So for a dungeon crawler, and we're talking about the end of the test build here. So what you would have for a dungeon crawler's vertical slice. So for Hellboy, let's look at Hellboy as an example. In Hellboy, the vertical slice stage, we would have probably one very rough character sheet showing like how the character has things on there and what they might do. It might have one or two rules. You don't have to worry about the full set. We'd have maybe one enemy type. We'd have a single board section. Nothing in terms of other cards or components. A couple of very simple tokens to represent characters. And we would just look to play through a single round of the game. So we might, in the case of Hellboy, do the enemy phase. The enemy follows these AI steps and moves in. You don't have to have everything in place. You can use placeholders. So if you have something which says, in the full game, I would like there to be a system by which the enemy targets different heroes. For now, you can just say roll a dice to pick one randomly. But you wouldn't want to go much beyond that. You want to get as little stuff on the table as possible to make a playable game, and then gradually grow from there. I hope that answered the question in a vague fashion. If you want to know more detail, I would recommend coming along to the game design course. And then you can jump on our Discord server, ask us loads of questions, and actually we go into this stuff in a bit more detail anyway. What we got? The question there from Pitters on Discord: what is the most simple type of game for a first-time designer? Great question. I would say, for a first-time designer, try to make something simple. It is true that really simple games are actually often really hard to design, but if you can come up with something which has not many components, not many different rules all vying for things, don't do anything too sprawling and massive, do a nice, straightforward 2-player game that you could play in 15 minutes. Aim for something like that. Don't worry about making it perfect. Just go through the process of making a game. Follow the steps of our process. Buy our game design course and follow the steps on that. And then you will find that doing something simple can then grow into bigger things. What sort of games do I prefer to design? War games, dungeon crawlers, card games? the main answer is I like to design things that are different to the last thing I designed. My brain works best when it's not doing the same thing over and over again. So after designing a dungeon crawler, I like to go and look at a war game or a role-playing game or a simple dice game or that sort of thing. I like to mix it up, basically. But generally, I just enjoy putting games on tables and making them work. Yes, Kieran has made a good point there. For automata stuff, look at Morten Pedersen. I'm not entirely sure how you pronounce it, but yeah, there's quite a few people doing really interesting things with AI systems and automata systems. Hax says, how do you playtest smaller rules like card text and special character rules? So that is the sort of thing that would come in after you've got your core engine functioning. So you've got your test build, you've then pushed into the mechanical draft, you've figured out how the game starts, how it ends, you've figured out like the broad strokes of what a character might look like, for example. Then you just start adding these rules in. So the way you test them is once you've stabilized the engine, you start adding those little rules in, and you test them either through guided or solo or blind testing. You see how they work, and you change them if they don't work. Or you find out what works about them and you try to copy that elsewhere. So the golden rule is try it out, see if it works. But don't worry about little, like individual niche little rules, like, how a particular magic sword works until you've figured out how a barbarian moves through a corridor. Neil on Discord said, so when's the Brain Ammo game coming? Every time I do one of these seminars, I will say something which makes you think, oh, that could be a game. Normally, I think of a random idea, which is going to be like the kind of game I'm going to talk about. I try to do a different one every time. So this time was the Kings of War Undead Bone Collecting game. For some reason, throughout the course, I kept coming back to a game about peanut farming in the Mediterranean. I don't know why that is. I don't know if even peanuts are farmed in the Mediterranean. But we had all sorts of talk about weaponized peanut weevils and peanut carts and all sorts of things. And occasionally, it sounded like I said something quite rude. I never did, honest. So any last questions before we call it a day? I can see there is a question being typed in Discord, or possibly just a comment being typed in Discord. I'm going to hold on and see if anything happens there. The suspense. Cool. How do you check you're not designing a game that's already been designed, mechanic or theme equivalent? First step I would say is don't worry about it too much, because there are loads of games that are really fundamentally similar, but as long as they're different enough, it doesn't really matter. Because so I mean, for example, I've worked on Blood Bowl, Blood Bowl, Dread Ball, and Blitz Bowl, all of which are arena-based sports games, and they are all very different. They have a lot of similarities, but a lot of things that make them different. And I happily play all three of them. And so, first of all, don't worry about it too much. Secondly, the best advice, as before, is just play loads of games. Play loads of games that are out there. You can go on things like Board Game Geek, which is a site which catalogs games. You can look for things that are similar to what you've done. You can, say that you were making a sports game. You could type in what sports-themed fantasy board games are there, and you'll get a list. Go and research those. Also, that's another reason to put your game in front of other designers, because other designers will say to you, oh, this feels a bit like this. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because you can look at what works for that game, what doesn't, what it does, what it doesn't do, and respond to that in your own designs. Space Cricket. I want to do Chaos Darts. Just a miniatures game for darts where there's no player interaction between the players on the pitch. I think it'd be an amazing April Fool Kickstarter. Do I find myself playing games that I've designed for fun after they've been released? Very rarely. There are not many games that I've designed that I will happily play. Hellboy is definitely one of them. League of Infamy is definitely one of them. And I think it's quite telling that these are games I've done where I've worked on them with Sophie. So it's not just me that's designed them. If I've designed a game myself and I play it, I'll be in playtesting mode. I can't help that. I'll be looking for things that have changed. But there are a few games that I play after they've come out that I've designed. So there we go. I think that's pretty much the end of the seminar. Thank you so much for taking part. Thanks for playing our games if you have done. If you want to learn more, get the full design course. We have the Bear Wizard discount code. If you go to needycatgames.com/learn and pick up a copy of the Game Design Online course, there'll be some stuff from this that will be familiar. There'll be a whole load of other stuff as well, including full course materials, access to our Discord server where you can ask us questions about game design and really drill down on things. If you use the Bear Wizard discount code, so Bear Wizard, all one word, all capitals, you can get 20% off. That makes it £40 for a 6-part course all about game design. And hopefully, if you've enjoyed this, you'll enjoy that as well, because it's really more of the same. It's me talking about game design in, and going through our process step by step and helping you design games. We've got a bunch of people who have just done it in real time, and they are already working on games and showing us games they're working on, which is really exciting. So thank you ever so much for coming along. I hope you enjoy the rest of the Mantic Open Day. If you've got any further questions, pop them in the Needy Cat Games seminar channel on Discord, and I'll answer them in text form later on. For now, I'm going to go and have some lunch, and that's it really. So thank you one and all. Thanks to Ronnie for employing me and setting me off on this amazing journey, and to everyone else at Mantic for always being lovely, and especially Matt, who makes a cracking cup of tea. I'm going to call it a day. I'm going to end the broadcast, figure out how. There it is. I never know how to end these, but I'm ending it now. Thanks a lot. Come join us for the full course. Use the Bear Wizard thing. It's only valid till 1 p.m, so you've got just under an hour to pick that up at £40 rather than £50, which is an absolute steal, I would say. Cool. Thank you, everyone, and I'll see you later.